All right, everybody. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Michael Overton. Dr. Michael Overton received his bachelor degree and Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from North Carolina State University and completed a dairy production medicine residence and Masters of Preventive Veterinary Medicine at the University of California, Davis. During his careers, Mike has spent 8 years as a practicing veterinarian, 14 years in academia teaching first at UC Davis and then at the University of Georgia. For the past 13 years, he has worked in the industry, first with Elanco and now with Zoetis. In his current role within the Precision Animal Health unit of Zoetis, his responsibilities focus on the development of a global cloud-based analytics platform for the creation and delivery of data-based solutions and enhanced customer value. He has worked and taught extensively in the areas of reproductive management, transition management, analysis of on-farm records, heifer management, and economic decisions making. Throughout his career, Mike has focused on identifying opportunities to enhance productivity and profitability through advanced data analysis and economic modeling. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody to be here and thank you, Dr. Mike Overton.
Thank you. Perfect. All right. You guys can obviously hear me. I see a lot of familiar faces showed up to hear me anyway, so thanks for coming. We'll jump into this. This is actually a presentation that originally I put together for a webinar I did with for Valley Ag Software, and I fleshed it out a little bit more, put a little different nuance to it from the repro side of things, but just jump into it for the sake of time because I got a fair bit of stuff to get through. Three terms we're all hopefully familiar with these: cull rate, replacement rate, herd turnover. The topic of removing cows, to say the least, is very controversial. There are people that get pretty wrapped around the axle, so to speak, about this. But if we think about it, to cull means to simply reduce the population by removal. And we all can probably agree that cull rate's got a negative connotation. It's removal. Many people think about removal due to failure, when in fact, as we improve management, improve genetics, we see more and more replacements being made simply because of the ability to improve productivity, selective replacement. We started using the term herd turnover, and that opens things up a little bit, but it still has a little bit negative connotation of kind of churn here from a turnover perspective. So what we're really going on now is this idea of replacement rate. It kind of gets more to the core of the action we're actually taking. And that is because we are actually removing animals for a lot of different reasons, because we almost never want to have an open slot. There's only been one time in my entire career where it actually made sense to leave a slot open when an animal left the herd because the cost of production was so much more than the value was being produced. But we typically bring in a replacement animal. And so keep this in mind. We replace cows in order to increase our expected profitability. Don't lose sight of that as I go through the presentation today. So why is all the concern about dead and sold cows in analysis here? Well, the number one reason is simply the focus on cost. Raising, purchasing, replacement heifers, this whole combination, typically the second or third largest variable cost of production. I mean, obviously feed number one, and in some places, sometimes, maybe most of the time, labor. Replacement rate, really quickly, just defined as numbers sold and died, lactation greater than 0 in a 12-month period, divided by the average number of milking and dry for that same 12-month period. Okay, so we're looking at the denominator as the average herd size. And another way, if you look at replacement rate in a stable herd that's not expanding, not contracting, is basically the number of animals entering is equal to the number leaving. Okay, by definition, that has to be the case. So when we talk about replacement rates, many people focus on the concept we got to get it as low as possible because they're focusing on cost reduction and not necessarily on profit optimization. In other words, and I hear this a lot, if I can keep this cow another lactation, I save my replacement costs. Yeah, if that's your focus, that's true, but it ignores the potential lost opportunity of getting a better animal in her slot. Okay, good timely replacement decisions depend on availability of replacement heifers, and a focus on optimizing profit potential, not simply on focusing on lowering cost or focusing on staying below some nebulous benchmark. All right, I'm going to give you a quick background on economic model I put together. This is just very general, so don't get too caught up in this, but it's a simple economic model based on the spreadsheet. All I'm trying to do is mimic the major variable costs and revenue streams associated with milking and dry cows. And what I'm doing is I'm actually bringing a cohort of animals into this hypothetical herd and following that cohort through 10 potential lactation. So imagine building a hypothetical herd. You got a group of heifers that calf for the first time in their lactation. Over the course of that lactation, some get replaced, most survive to go into the next lactation. You do it again, you do it again. And of course, you have dropouts every lactation. So then within each of these, you've got, I've incorporated parity-specific risk, cost, production. Everything is put back onto a net present value to the time of first calving. Now, all these are different inputs. These are just some of the ones I include, but replacement risk on a parity basis. And I'm accounting for died, sold with revenue, or sold but condemned, i.e. no revenue. Market cow weights and value that vary by lactation number, cumulative energy corrected milk, and I'm looking at 4033 ECM. Length of lactation that varies, dry period length that varies, calf revenue, after removing stillbirths based upon calf type, and then projected transition disease costs, management costs. All these things are into the model. The output is really what I showed you the background for, is a concept called income over cost, similar to income over feed cost, but goes a bit further. The revenue factors I'm including here are milk, calf values, and market values, market cow values, okay? Cost factors, lactating and dry cow feed, dry cow management cost, transition disease costs, and of course, the cost of bringing replacements into the herd. I first tabulate this as a lifetime value, then adjust it back to a net present value on a per day, and finally come into an annualized value. And it's that value that we'll be talking about some as we move forward through some of the slides. Again, income over cost is milk plus calf plus market value minus all these different costs, okay? So with that backdrop, if we look at residual value prediction, this is looking at what value is remaining for an animal in the herd. And the way I do this is I start off saying an animal that starts her first lactation, her value is equal to the cost of that animal's acquisition into the herd. So whatever her projected income over cost lifetime is, that divided by itself times that value gives you your residual value at the start. And as she goes across through that lactation, starts the next, her remaining residual value lifetime is lower because she's now depreciated. She's lost her first lactation. We get into second and remaining lactations. Therefore, her value to the herd on an economic basis is lower than the average first lactation. Now, occasionally you get into herds where first lactation has such a high removal risk that a second lactation animal may actually have a higher residual value than an average first lactation coming in. That's what this is looking at, is residual value for each animal. This is a predicted loss for an animal that's removed. This incorporates a combination of sold for market, sold and condemned, or died. And so this is the losses that occur for animals removed. Okay, so this is net market value. So if you look at this residual value, this value here depends on production, her expected future production, her removal risk each lactation, timing of removal, the feed cost, dry period length, interest rate, all those things. And so you end up with this type of residual value curve. Not perfectly straight line, but pretty darn close, at least in this set of assumptions. This will vary based on removal risk, mortality, lots of different values, okay? All right, so now that gets us into some more concepts we'll talk about as we go through this presentation before I actually get into some monitoring things. Remember, replacing an inferior cow represents an opportunity to improve the herd. Optimal timing means we consider lots of things. What's the expected improvement in production with the replacement compared to the cow she is replacing? Really important. What's the expected genetic gain of the replacement and her future offspring? There's value to be had there if you look long-term. Potentially lower cost of ownership of the new improved model. Okay? And finally, the revenue for the current cow when we replace her with a fresh heifer. This is what I'm referring to as salvage value. As we do a better job of proactively replacing animals versus reactively replacing animals, we're actually going to assume a higher salvage value. And so this replacement cost I like to talk about net replacement cost, but it's raising or acquisition, however you get your heifers into the herd, minus the salvage value of the animal that she is replacing. Okay. So again, proper focus should be on that transaction and not simply reducing the explicit cost of the heifers coming into the herd. And as soon as I say this, at some point, someone is either thinking this, or they've heard a colleague or a neighbor or a friend say, but she hasn't paid for herself. And not to step on toes, but I'm going to jump on toes. I really don't care. On an incremental marginal basis. Okay. The decision to replace a cow should never consider when she has paid for herself, but rather what's most profitable for the slot. This is a summarization of a 15,000 cow data set I pulled together. It represents a random subsample of 1,000 cows from 15 herds, followed through 10 potential lactations. And so we got an average cow here, and I'm trying to get to this endpoint. So this is a little old now, but 2,800 was that target endpoint. That's i.e. the cost of the acquisition. And all I'm trying to do is get to this. How long does it take for her to pay for herself without regard to salvage or anything else? So here's an average cow, first lactation. You see the calving to dry period, total milk, average per day, milk and calf income, feed cost, dry cow transition cost. I'm assigning $7 per day for housing and other costs. Right or wrong, it's just a set cost. So at the end, it takes this average cow basically 2.5 lactations to get to this economic endpoint. Now, when someone says, but she hasn't paid for herself, you got to ask yourself, what animal are you talking about? This is an average animal. Let's not look at the average. Let's compare her to an animal that's not the worst, but an animal that's at the 15th percentile. She's into her 7th lactation before she gets the same economic endpoint. So my question to you is, why do you want to keep the absolute worst animals the longest in order to allow them the opportunity to pay for themselves? Okay. I know some of you have seen this now for the first time. And some of you are going, yeah, I've already seen and heard that. That's okay. But look at this on a per day basis, $3.28 versus $1.34. The idea that an animal has to be retained long enough to pay for itself is big, big economic mistake. Cows basically have a bell-shaped distribution in a herd. You've got some that take a whole lot less time to pay for themselves. That doesn't mean we replace them once they pay for themselves. We want to keep them as long as possible within reason. But these low producing cows, many times you're better off to actually replace them early in the first lactation instead of giving them the opportunity to exist longer. Okay. So it's about cost versus value. Remember that fresh heifer is an opportunity. We need to look at each animal individually and say, does this fresh heifer's projected value, is that expected to be greater than the lowest value of the cow? If so, that cow needs to find a new home. And hopefully it's in the right condition. She's good welfare. She goes to market, yields a nice price. But if not, it doesn't mean you're forced to keep the heifer in your herd. Unless you're one of those that really got suckered into chasing the black crack and you don't have enough heifers and you have to keep every heifer that calves. That's still a mistake. But a lower value cow could be at any stage of lactation. As I showed you, it could be a first lactation cow, and it could be, in my estimation, animal 75, 90 days of milk, first lactation. So a key component of profit optimization is looking at this salvage value that you get for the animal you're trading in. Now, a dead cow, euthanized cow, obviously, no salvage value. But think about sold cows. If a cow gets condemned, not only is zero revenue, it's actually a cost. Many times you get a bill for disposal of those cows that are condemned. But if she's sold for beef or even for dairy purposes, you get either from a little to right now, a lot of money for those animals. In good shape, especially younger animals. So more dead, more condemned cows, that's not good. I am going to argue pretty adamantly, euthanize is much better than trying to sell compromised cows. So I'm not trying to force that on you. I'm trying to get you to think about these decisions early in the process. Now, when we think about replacement costs and balancing these, there's two very important, related yet competing concepts to understand. The first is very, very apparent to almost everybody, is that longer time in the herd, lower cost per day. It's just a greater dilution of that cost by more days in a herd, right? Same idea. It's true And it's good to a point. But when we fixate on cost reduction versus profit optimization, we get to the point where we want to keep them as long as possible. And long as possible is not the right answer from a herd's profitability perspective. Okay? That's assuming you have replacements. The second concept that's competing here is longer time in the herd, the lower the future salvage value. And I'm looking at it from the perspective of an animal calves. And if I'm projecting 5 lactations, that means 5 opportunities for her to die during lactation. I'm also looking 5 years into the future from a net present value perspective. And I've got an older cow that's got more likelihood of becoming lame, mastitic, something else compromising her. The point I'm trying to get at, salvage value matters, and it really matters a lot. So when we talk about heifer cost, when a farm raises heifers, there's basically 2 types of cost. We're all familiar with average raising cost, and right now, it is truly probably close to this $2,600, $2,900 level if you're including initial calf value. And I had someone other day say it was only $2,100, and what you're not including the value or the opportunity cost of that heifer calf you're keeping. Then you have a marginal raising cost, and this is where we're focusing on simply the marginal cost, the calf itself, feed, vaccines, breeding, and so forth, but not the fixed cost. And by and large, not much in the way of labor costs, depending on how many marginal heifers we're talking about. Now, on top of those, we've got a current market value, $3,500. I'm just using this for right now. Let's call that the purchase price. But that also represents the opportunity cost of a spring or a fresh heifer that is not sold by the dairy. So it may not be cash flow changing hands, but it still represents an investment by the dairy of an animal that they could have marketed. So that's something that has to be considered. So as an aside, if we think about this, why are springers selling for so much money right now? I did a presentation 20 months ago where one of the key producers is like, this is simply not sustainable. They're looking at only on an explicit cost basis without regard to the salvage value. Okay. The reason heifers are bringing this is, number one, the market, i.e. dairy farmers, are willing to pay that. And why are they willing? Well, replacement of a lousy cow means more future profit. And number 2, they don't want empty stalls. So they understand this. And we see people still paying lots and lots of money for heifers. All right, bring back the salvage value. Let's think about a couple examples. Cow 101 is replaced. She's got a market value today. If she goes to market day, let's say it's $2,000. The cost of that heifer coming in is $3,500. That means the replacement cost, cash flow wise, is $1,500. And cow 243 dies, 0 revenue. That represents a difference, obviously, of $2,000 in terms of cash flow cost of replacement. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Again, the difference is due to salvage value, but this salvage value could be anywhere from $2,500 down to a couple $100, depending on where the animal's going, the age of the animal, the size, body weight, all market values, so forth. When we start talking about future salvage value of an animal that calves today, that's when I'll start to look at things a little differently. Back here, the $2,000 represents an animal's value today that's going to market. That's today's current salvage. Here, I'm talking about representing the future projected salvage value. So I got a heifer that enters a herd, and let's say she's entering a herd that's got a replacement rate of 36%. That means I'm expecting about 2.8 years lifetime from that animal in the herd, okay? Annual mortality risk of 5%, a final risk at the time of marketing of 7% due to condemnation. I got 9% interest rate, and I'm using a future beef value that's a little bit more conservative than the current market shows, admittedly, $1.60 per pound. Average weight of the future marketed cow, say 17. I'm not talking about the really heavy D&Bs. Current cost or value of the market cow, of the replacement heifer is $3,500. That gives me a forecasted net salvage of $1,727 into the future. And if you subtract this from the acquisition, the replacement, that's my replacement cost net. And divide that by the number of days, I get my projected replacement cost per day. The reason I go through all this is that for you to understand this salvage is really critical. And to illustrate that, I've got some sensitivity tables here for you. The first one is salvage value only, where I've got changes in mortality risk and condemnation risk. So I'm changing these two values right here. Red's bad, green is good. So I have obviously low mortality risk, low condemnation risk with the same expected lifetime has the highest salvage value compared to high mortality, high condemnation. Pretty straightforward, right? Next is the interest rate assumed and the replacement rate. And this is where it starts to get a little bit more challenging for people. If we look at an 8% interest rate and 30% replacement, here's your future projected salvage compared to a higher replacement rate. We've got a difference of about 200. We got a difference of $200 between those in terms of salvage value. And why is that? This animal leaves faster than this animal. And if we assume the same weight, then that's a difference of $200 based on difference in mortality risk for the different time point. Okay. And then simply the interest rate is what I'm talking about on the net present value basis. So this is the point I'm trying to make. Higher replacement rate on average is going to give you a higher salvage value. Of course, you're going to have more turns, so it doesn't lower the total replacement cost. I'm just talking about each acquisition, each transaction. And then if you look at net replacement cost, kind of taking this back out, $3,500, here's your salvage values. Salvage value makes a big impact on the actual cost of the replacement. We're going here from a salvage value of $800 to a salvage value of $2,000. There's a pretty big difference in the economic impact on replacing cows in this herd. Okay, so to illustrate this a bit more, a lot of people when they start doing partial budgets start calculating culling losses, and in my opinion, they're not doing them correctly. But let's look at cow 101. She was an average cow in the herd, but she failed to get pregnant. She was sold for beef at the end of her 4th lactation. Her market value, $2,000. So if you look at this from a cash flow perspective, again, a replacement cost of $3,500, that means that from a cash flow perspective, her value of that slot is $3,500 because that's what it costs to bring an animal in. And so the cash flow I get is the positive 2,000 minus the 35. That's a cash flow impact of the transaction of replacing that animal. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is this approach doesn't care whether it's a first, a third, or a 9th lactation, assuming the body weight is the same and the market value per pound is the same. And that's simply not a correct way to look at economic transactions in a dairy. I think we all agree a first lactation animal has a different value on average compared to an 8th lactation cow that has very little predicted residual value in the tank. So an economic approach of this is looking at projections, and let's assume that the residual value, similar to what I showed you before for this cow, 2140. So now if you look at the cost of replacing this cow as a late 4th, the actual economic impact is $140, comparing what she had left in the tank projected versus what she's going to yield from a market cow perspective. Does that make sense to everybody? Well, just a little different way of looking at it. I'm going to argue both concepts are important because you can have a dairy that totally understands this, but just cannot handle it from a cash flow perspective. But this is also a reason why salvage is so important to make sure you lessen some of the financial impact on this. All right, now getting into some of the analyses, kind of what the gist of this is about. Now we've done some background. As I said earlier to open this up, most people assume that lower replacement rates equal greater profitability. I don't necessarily agree with that. It's a case of it depends. This would be true, all else being equal. For example, if all cows were healthy and equal in production and market value, and the only reason for replacement was for mortality, then lower replacement rate is going to be better, period. But all else is not equal, and cows are not equal in value or productivity or future projected productivity. If I lower mortality risk across the herd, including euthanized, let's all agree that's a good deal, right? Welfare-wise, salvage value-wise. But if I lower the percent sold in a dairy, it might be good if the reason for the reduction is because those existing cows did not decline in value enough to deserve to be replaced. That would be good. But it's bad if I held on to the cows that should have been replaced because either I don't have enough heifers or else chasing some stupid benchmark around replacements or listening to what the press is saying your replacement rate should be. You cannot tell if a farm's making good replacement decisions by evaluating percent replace in early lactation or total herd replacement rate without getting into the weeds really quickly, diving deeper to understand what's happening. Okay. To make that point, this is another output of that income over cost model. Let's assume this is an average cow in that 15,000 cow herd data set. And these are different herd replacement rates we're looking at. So if we look at a 36% replacement rate in this average cow, let's assume that's her income over cost value, $2,480 per year. So most people think if you simply lower replacement rate, you benefit because you lower cost. In that case, you're going to go from 2,480 to 2,582. You have an increase in the projected profitability. That's moving along a horizontal line. Okay. But the reality is, if you do this because you're forcibly retaining cows longer, either because there's not enough pressure from heifers to allow you to replace cows, or you got the mindset, I got to keep all cows a bit longer, you don't go across this horizontal line. You go across a diagonal. So now you might go from 36% to 34%. You're patting yourself on the back the whole time, but yet profitability is decreased on a per cow per year basis. I got a lot of blank stares right now. Does this make sense to everybody? We're talking about forcibly retaining cows that should have been replaced. The flip side is also true. If I do a better job of selectively replacing cows that should be replaced earlier, I might increase my replacement rate, but I might do it in a manner that yields an increase in profitability. Now, this is harder to quantify. I'll admit to that. But it's a critical point that we should not lose track of. Careful and appropriate selective replacement can increase profitability if it results in increase in production. Okay. Higher replacement rate is costly if production does not change, but it can be more profitable. Questions about this before I go on? This is a difficult concept. I get it. But the point is, most people are focusing on a horizontal without considering what happens when I keep cow longer because I don't have a heifer to take her place. I'll give you a quick sideline. I was in California a couple of weeks ago. I saw Renee out there, and we're talking about HPAI. If any of you guys use some type of model forecasting D&B threshold, most Holstein herds right now, probably 60, 65 pounds is the targeted threshold for production, or when a D&B cow should be replaced. In that data set, 19 Holstein herds, the average production per day of the last 30 days for cows sold in late lactation was 42 pounds. So why did those herds hold on the cows? I'm going to argue 20 pounds too long. They didn't have the heifers available to take their place, by and large. Is that costly? Heck yeah, it's costly. It's very expensive. It sounds only 20 pounds, but we're talking about a decline of 0.15 to 0.2 per day from say 60 to 40, and that cumulative impact, lost opportunity, is huge. Okay, so keeping inferior cows in the herd longer lowers costs, no doubt, no debate, but I'm trying to argue it also lowers potential profitability. Heifers are expensive, but don't get cutting costs to the point that you hurt profitability. We need to make these replacement decisions before cows become liability versus waiting to see what happens. And never restrict replacement just to try to meet some benchmark. Again, I'll say it again, you can't tell if a farm's making good decisions on replacements by evaluating either the percent replacement early lactation or total herd replacement rate. It's one of those metrics I just can't stand to look at. I do it for people because they insist, but it's stupid right now. So let's focus on monitoring. Just as a reminder, monitoring is just regular recording and review of activities. A lot of times we encourage people to record stuff, but if we don't review it with them, we're not really monitoring, we're just recording crap. So keep that in mind when you ask someone to record something that you're going to look at. Make sure you look at it and use it to provide feedback. The objectives of monitoring: trying to recognize normal, trying to look at some the impact of some change you make on management, maybe to identify unintended drifts or declines in productivity or procedures or processes. and also to help identify potential causes of abnormal performance. Okay. Now, there's 4 different areas or approaches for monitoring herd performance. There's exception monitoring. And this is one of those that this is a little bit too late, but you don't want to wait any longer to identify animals that really should have gone, for example, a while back. Let's get rid of them as soon as we can. Who needs that attention now? Or who needs an insemination as soon as possible? Historical performance monitoring. What's been the recent historical trend in performance? And I'm emphasizing recent here. Going back 2 or 3 years doesn't make sense in terms of trying to compare performance, but recently, what's it look like? And where does it look like we're heading? This is peering into the future. And this is where we're trying to focus on using leading indicators when possible, those metrics that help point us to where we're heading instead of waiting until we get there. Okay. We need to, when possible, monitor tasks and procedures. This is, to me, one of the most important things we should be doing on dairies. I struggle with it because obviously we don't record tasks like this pretty much in the record system, but how can we identify processes and tasks and monitor those efficiencies around that versus simply waiting for results? But at a high level, we're trying to ask some very basic questions. Has anything changed? What was the cause? And what actions do I need to take now, tomorrow, maybe next month into the future? Okay. Now, brings us to the topic of the day. What about monitoring sold and dead cows? This represents the ultimate in outcomes. Something bad has already happened when we're looking at deads. We're looking at solds. Purely historical. Now, it is helpful maybe at times to understand normal past performance, but it doesn't give you any light on the why. And if you're going to venture the say, well, what about reasons? I'll get to that in a second, and that's far from ideal. Sold events essentially do not occur unless there are replacements available. Lowering the percent sold often feels good, but can be deceiving. Again, people don't often recognize the opportunity cost associated with keeping a cow too long. To put this in another perspective, imagine you've got a herd running at 38% replacement rate, but they've listened to all the recommendations about reducing heifer production. And as a consequence, they're now only able to replace 34%. Well, suppose the underlying reasons and need for replacement has not changed. That means going from 38% replacement to 34, they're going to be keeping cows 110, 120 days longer that should have gone on the market before. And is that costly? Yeah, somewhere between $1.50 and $2.50 per day delay in replacement of those cows. That represents significant lost opportunity cost, accounting for the cost of replacement. If sold risk increases, was it a bad decision? Was it a good decision? That number doesn't tell you anything. I'm going to argue that many more heifers should be replaced early in first lactation than is currently taking place. And yet when I talk to producers or consultants, one of the questions they ask is, so what's my first lactation cull rates, what people ask, and they want that number to be as low as possible. And I want to make sure you do the right thing. And actually, I'm trying to elevate it. And just to be as clear as I possibly can, I am not encouraging the replacement of high-producing older cows or high-producing any cows. Because I get asked that. Why do I want to replace high-producing cows? I don't. Is that clear to everybody? We're talking about improving the herd by selectively taking out animals who deserve a shot at a different career, but not staying in the herd as a lactating cow. What can you learn from monitoring sold and dieds? Well, that's what they did last month, but it doesn't really tell me why or what happened and what the opportunities are, and how is it going to change management approach moving forward. So let's go through some of this. This is simply sold and died by 60 days of milk. This is a very, very popular item for people to monitor. Here is the information in just a frequency histogram. You got fresh across the top line, you got sold in orange, and you got died in the red. Okay. If I look at this at numbers, which is how I prefer to look at it, we've got fresh, sold, died, and you got 68% confidence intervals. So we actually highlight a couple of these. June, we had an uptick in mortality risk by 60 days, 5 to 8% versus an overall average of 2 to 3%. So that's not good. August, we had an increase in percent sold. From 6 to 7 is a confidence interval, 8 to 11. So that represents a true increase, but I don't know if that's good, if that's bad. I have excluded dairy sales here, but I still don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know if it's because cows calved in, they had crappy, terrible metritis RPs and wheels are falling off, or if they had an opportunity to market some cows, or simply they had cows that were low producers and they had better heifers come in and take their place. Not selling those would be a mistake as opposed to increasing the sales of those cows. So let's dive into this section just a bit more. This is deads, and I'm just going to look at total deads here. But what details of deaths from the June calvings can we learn? These are, and I did not go handpick herd. This is actually a big herd I happened to be working with when I put this presentation together for VAS. And it turned out to be pretty valuable for illustration purposes. I chose it because they were a big herd and that was it. This is deads in June. So this is the date of the deads, but the month that they calved was June. And this is the remark in the herd record system, okay? Now I've cleaned the remarks up because sometimes there was some misspelling, but it was all this is what happened. So if we look at these, 7 cows died according to this with bloody gut. So my question is that real? Is that a mistake in identification? Because hemorrhagic bowel syndrome is something I typically see more commonly around peak lactation, post-peak. This is early days in milk. Is this a bloody gut issue that someone's going to try to sell them some foo-foo dust or some vaccine to try and fix? I'm going to argue that's probably not truly bloody gut. Okay. Number 2, we got 3 died with metritis. 2, 3, and 3 days in milk. My master's work is around metritis. We don't expect to see cows dying of metritis at 3 days in milk. An acute, really bad case of perimetritis causes death 5, 6, 7 days in milk, but not 2 or 3 days typically. Again, is that a miscode because we had a really bad dystocia and they called it metritis when they did something else to tear up? I don't know. And finally, we got lots of injuries, and all these E's mean euthanized. So do we need to wait to see animals euthanized to identify we've got a problem that's creating injuries in our cows? This is one herd, one set of reasons from 1 month of deaths. Let's look at some more. This removals by 30, 60 days of milk. Again, transition is a very risky time, but sold by 30 and sold by 60 is not a good monitor, no matter what. And if you've got compelling evidence why I'm wrong, please see me, but I have not been able to figure out why this is a great monitor. It's not specific. It's too late. Why wait until potentially bad things happen to identify an issue? It's ignoring mortality, because I'm looking at sold here. It's ignoring the interaction of morbidity and mortality. I'll come back to that in a second. It encourages your employees to keep cows that should be sold past your cut point, depending on how you're incentivizing them. And that's a real thing. I've seen herds that really focus on removals by 60 only to see a uptick in removals in the next 30 days because guys are not stupid. If you're incentivizing on low removals by 60, they'll keep that cow longer if they can figure out a way to do it so that they don't get penalized. Many cows replaced in their lactation were poor cows from the prior lactation that happened to be inseminated with beef semen, and you didn't want to beef them before going dry. You wanted to calve them. Now they're calving in because that's what you wanted, but you intended to sell them before. Now they're being sold in the first 30 or 60 days. Is that a bad thing? That's what you decided to do. I'm going to argue that's a good thing, right? But this stupid benchmark is going to say it's bad if you look at it that way. The interpretation of results is often wrong and often motivates the wrong behavior. That's my whole point. Just say no when we start comparing it to some benchmark. If the risk is increased, was it because of some disease event such as lameness, mastitis, DA? Maybe, but let's record lameness, mastitis, and DA instead of looking at sold and dies. Was it due to dairy sales? Okay, I took those out of the previous report, but some herds actually make some good money by selling cows for dairy purposes. That's a great, great decision if you have the ability to do that. Was it based on very poor production and otherwise healthy cow? I'm going to say that's a good move. You might not like it, But the worst move would be to put up with her for another 3, 6, 9 months to wait and see what happens with her as opposed to replacing her sooner. If the risk is low, which many people strive to see or want to see, are they really doing a good job? Or are they simply not replacing cows that should be replaced? Is it because they don't have enough efforts calving to selectively replace cows? Is it because they're trying to meet some benchmark? All right, so here's some earlier lactation removals to think about. Cow 152, fresh, third lactation, had RP, metritis, chronic ketosis, then developed a DA, died at 14 days. Do we really need to see the death event to know this was a bad outcome? 245, fresh, fifth lactation, bad udder. She was retained because she was carrying a beef side calf. Sold her at 10 days of milk. Good job. You didn't keep her for another lactation because you weren't planning to start with. You got the beef calf out. Is that a good decision or not? I'm going to argue, think most people would agree that's a good decision, and yet it made your benchmark look worse. Cow 516's early lactation, first lactation, she's healthy, but just doesn't have it. Her milk average through 48 days of milk is 36 pounds. I know a lot of producers that would keep her and go, well, let's wait and see what she does next lactation. Anthony's laughing, but he probably knows a couple of these people too. The whole idea is if we replace her, our metric looks bad, but I'm going to argue it's a good decision. I've got more data, published some stuff around this. If we keep her, our metrics improve, but we're likely stuck with a huge lost opportunity, waiting to see what happens. All right, here's another way of looking at it. Here's the tale of two farms. Let's assume for this illustration, same nutrition, same housing, other management, but farm A has these weekly vet visits, local slaughter plants close by, and they move cows quickly to slaughter. So good treatment protocols, flexible slaughter-friendly treatment options, trained on-farm staff handles most calvings. Farm B, more remote. They don't have the same opportunity either for veterinary visits or local slaughter options. And they have this mentality of, well, we can save them. They do have good adherence to protocols, but a lot of the protocols include longer slaughter withdrawals, which kind of ties their hands. They do have good trained on-farm staff handling most calvings, and they do their own surgeries. If management and everything else is truly equal, which farm is more likely to have a higher percent sold by 60 days? A, without a doubt. And which one's more likely to have more deads? B. All right, is that pretty straightforward? This is the nuance, the balance between morbidity and mortality that people don't tend to think about. Here's another example. Farm C and D, let's assume these two also have good weekly visits, good protocols, good flexible slaughter-friendly options. But C has a few extra heifers, and D, they're still hooked on that black crack. They don't have enough heifers. Now, management, health equal, which farm's more likely to have percent sold by 60 is higher? C. And more likely to have higher percent dead by 60? Again, D. Or, yeah, C and D. So my preferred approach versus simply monitoring sold and dead, monitor processes, monitor leading indicators when possible. There are lots of things we know that point to bad outcomes. Days in close-up, prepartum dry matter intake, fresh cow dry matter intake, stocking density of transition pens, transition diseases. You got a lot of herds that have a lot of sold and dieds, and they don't have squat recorded for mastitis and metritis and RP and lameness. It just doesn't show up. Okay? Let's get those things monitored so we know what's really happening and can act faster rather than waiting for animals to be sold or to die. Monitor early milk production. Not just the average, but look at the variation, the scatter in these animals. What's going on with these very low cows? Monitor heifer to cow flows. Does the farm have enough replacements to remove cows at the right time? One of the things I used to like to do is go into a farm, just to get a scatter plot last test and go, do you know what's happening with these low cows? If the herdsman knows something's going on, great. If they don't, why not? And why is there not something in the record that she has a known problem? Is my heifer quality improving? Am I able to put more pressure on existing cows? So all of these require consistent, good recording. But again, be careful with setting disease goals for your farmer employees because You just might get what you incentivize. I've seen it over and over and over. All right, here's another one. Are cows that should be replaced based on predicted economics. So what I've got here is a cow value by days of milk and by repro code. And so we got, basically I got little crosshairs. This is at 90 days. This is early lactations, but these animals don't have enough production information to really give them a good value. So they got negative cow values here. What I'm interested in what's happening with these cows. I'm excluding DNBs and dry cows here. This is only for lactating cows. And if you look at this, if I now go back and look at DNB cows, this is a list of DNB cows that are 5 pounds or more below that calculated threshold on the last 2 tests. Remember I talked about the California herds that were keeping cows all the way down to 42 pounds? This herd's keeping cows, last 2 tests, they've been below the threshold by at least 5 pounds, and they're still in the herd. Is this because they don't have enough heifers to take their place, or because they don't understand the idea of the opportunity cost? I'm going to argue most of these animals are still making money. They're paying for themselves. But if you compare what they're making versus the opportunity of bringing a better animal in, including replacement cost considerations, this is costing the herd money. Here's a report a lot of people look at, and I was asked by VAS to do this and show this one. Decon 9, it's a /9 dead cow report. This has got all the DCRs, the deads, the solds. These people spend a lot of time looking at this. I had to go look it up because I can't recall the last time I looked at it. And kind of the reason why is look at the number of heifers calving for this same herd. Does anything strike you as being kind of correlated, being similar? 86, 71, 90, 84, 65. 90. This determines how many animals leave the herd is sold. If you don't have heifers, you don't have the ability to sell cows if you're going to maintain a stable herd size. So CAR codes and reasons. This idea seems really straightforward when I'm asking the question, is it really? And I'm going to say, no, it's not. I'm not too far. I know we got to break it. So cow selected to be replaced. This is cow 1011. She's a 5th lactation cow, 347 days of milk, and she's open. She's also limping on her right hind leg, and she has another previous lameness recorded. Her last milk was set 37 of ECM, and her previous was 44. You load her onto the truck for shipment. So here's that same cow. So this is what I want to know. What reason are you going to assign for her being sold? Who says it's because of low milk? Who says it's because of repro? Who says it's because of lameness? Who says it's something else? Okay, all right. This is actual recorded reasons for cows that left a herd over the past year for that same dairy I was looking at before. You get sick, low milk, repro, udder, died, mastitis. Okay, probably fairly typical to most herds. But if we start looking at these, this is last recorded milk results by day of milk for cows that left the herd and coded as repro culls. Of the cows that left with the reason of repro, 16% had a current milk greater than 85 pounds. Does that make any sense to anybody? 15% were pregnant. 13% were less than 300 days of milk. This is just the one herd I pulled up to look at. I did not cherry pick this herd for outrageous information. In general, my approach is culling reasons not to be trusted. This is the average milk per day for the last 30 days for cows sold as low milk. You can't see this. This is 1 pound. This spike is around 46, 48 pounds. It's 121 pounds. This is 80 pounds. So look at all these cows over 80 pounds sold as low milk in the last 30 days. 11% over 80 pounds in the last 30 days before removal. It's pretty interesting. 17% of the cows coded with the code of mastitis never had a mastitis case recorded. Now, some of you will say, but she had one before she went on the truck. Fine, but it did not appear in the record. So I can't trust that one bit. So the next time you ask me to look at reasons and I go, why? Hopefully you understand a little bit about the why. The only reasons I kind of trust is dead and sometimes dairy. Right, Anthony? All right. Let's not pretend across dairies, reasons listed for why a cow left the herd actually mean anything. And it's challenged to actually pinpoint the exact reason. As a veterinarian, it's challenging at times to say why this cow actually went to market. The cow I showed you before. I hope the reason she left is because there was an economic opportunity to improve the herd. Try to keep things simple, repeatable within your herd. More codes are not necessarily better. Focus on the monitoring and reporting information prior to removal. Do each of the cows that are sold as sick have a health event in the record? If they don't, that's a great place to start understanding and recording what's actually happening disease-wise. This is a view of just simply looking at the pattern of sold and died for the last 150 days. Now, this doesn't tell me a whole lot, except for there's one thing that stands out to me. What do you guys see here? There you go, JP. You see the lines? Are these weeks where are these days that cows just all of a sudden fall apart and have to go to market? No, you're putting together loads because of heifers coming in and market opportunities, right? It just goes to show that a lot of times we sell animals at the right opportunities, not necessarily for other things. Here's estimated milk per day for the final 30 days of milk for cows sold in the last 30 days only. And what I'm trying to look at here, this is 300 days. So these are animals that were probably sold for some bad reason, because their milk was pretty high. Something bad happened with these cows probably. These cows, past 300 days of milk, these are in the 40s. These are low producing cows that should have been sold earlier if there were heifers available. Average milk per cow for all cows, 90 pounds. Average milk for cows sold, 59, but that includes a lot of these cows. These are going to be a lot lower. All right, I'll kind of finish up here with a quick little scenario for you to evaluate. 4 scenarios. Which herd's doing a better job? First scenario, herd A, 8% sold or died by 60. B is 9%, herd C is 10%. No dairy sales. Who's doing a better job? You don't have to answer out loud, but I hope you'll record something or think about it at least mentally. Next question, his replacement rate, and now I have sold and dieds within that. This is by 60. This is total herd replacement for the last 12 months. 37, 39, 34. Here's percent died and percent sold. Again, last 12 months, no dairy sales. Because I know everybody's got their pet metrics. Which herd's doing a better job here? And you're probably scared to say now. What herd's doing a better job in terms of percent animals sold as DNB? These are animals sold past 240 days of milk, coded as do not breed. Okay. And this is average milk per day in the last 30 days before being sold, when they're sold past 240 days of milk. This is a percent of the herd average of milk. This herd's low, but the herd average is not as high. It's only 34%. This herd's high, and it is 72% of the herd average. That's the idea I'm trying to get at. Everybody have their winners and losers here. Now which herd's doing a better job? Because A, E, J, and X were all the same herd. There were only 3 herds here. I just broke them into different deals and called them different codes. But the point I'm trying to make is that you get locked in on a specific metric you're focused on. It's your pet metric you like to monitor with. And I'm going to argue you can't do that. You got to look at things as a whole. And this is yet another reason I'm against benchmarking. Okay. So, summary. Optimal replacement decision making depends upon an adequate supply of heifers, high quality heifers, hopefully. Hard focus on improving profit potential by aggressively replacing cows at the right time, not waiting too long. Intentionally underproducing heifers or delaying replacement of cows will lower cost. I totally get that. I grant you that. But I'm going to argue it also potentially negatively impacts welfare and profitability at the herd level. Percent sold and died and culling reasons to me are really poor metrics to monitor. Let's look at some other things to try to improve our performance of how herds are managing and how herds are performing. If you hadn't figured it out yet, I hate benchmarking. I don't understand why people do it. I strongly discourage it. It doesn't help identify good opportunities that could not be identified through other means. Instead, focusing on leading indicators that are predictive and early enough to allow intervention before it's too late is my much preferred option. Okay? So I know I'm a minute or two over, but we're a little late starting, but if there's questions, I'm happy to answer them, and I'll hang out over break too if there's additional questions.
Gonna have, yeah, that side, right? Over, but any questions? So, yeah,
Victor?
Okay.
Hey, Cheryl. Yep.
There we go. Thanks, Mike. I'm curious, have you done any, if the beef price is really that high right now in Dale calves, have you done modeling to look and add that value into those that are trying to manage their inventory a lot closer to?
Yep. Every time I do it, I still come up with the same deal. My approach is I want you to have a modest excess to allow you a little bit of a buffer to replace a few more animals than you think you need, and then go with beef. I'm not talking about getting away from beef altogether. I'm just saying that there are a lot of herds, and I've got I hit a couple of slides from another data set I put together for a presentation earlier this year, NMC basically, to quantify, are we seeing the effects of herds not having enough heifers? And the short answer is absolutely. More chronic mastitis, more mortality, and lower milk at sold and dry compared to herds that had enough heifers. I can show you that if you want to see it. But when I look at and I did this at AABP, I've done it for several other meetings, comparing the cost of forsaking the sale of those beef cross to bring in heifers to allow that potential replacement of marginal cows. It pays every time, even with $1,600 black cross calves, beef cross calves. Yeah, it's the difference between cash flow and profit, Victor. Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I think I understood is you basically are thinking on the replacement with an average heifer replacement.
Yep.
So that would make a huge difference because nowadays we have much more information on the replacement.
Yep.
So if you have a very high value replacement, you can even go farther with the replacement.
Sure. Absolutely. If you have a higher predicted value of an incoming heifer, the threshold 60, 65 pounds goes out the window. But the flip side's also true. If I have a lower potential performance in a heifer, the threshold is going to be lower. I use a blended, but I made a point early, look at each individual heifer coming in. Does she represent an upgrade over the lowest value cow in the herd? If she does, bring her in. If she doesn't, she goes elsewhere. But to your point, you're absolutely right. There's a bell-shaped curve on replacement heifers, just like there's a bell-shaped curve on cows. And the better that quality of heifer is, the more pressure it puts on cows.
Point is, you know what heifer will replace the cow.
Yeah.
And that makes the difference for that particular decision.
Sure, but if I'm a big herd and I've got 20 animals coming in today, I'm going to look at the bottom heifer. Does she represent an upgrade over the lowest potential cow? The rest probably going to get a pass. I'm just using hypotheticals, but you're right. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make. There are heifers that calve that do not deserve a spot in the herd. A heifer you raise, you bred, you whatever, does not automatically get a ticket punch, or should not, to enter your herd. She needs to earn it through predictive productivity, age, size, genetics, all that. And if she doesn't represent an upgrade, she should go elsewhere. There's a big market for those right now. JP.
When?
It depends on the value proposition and what you can get for that heifer, the confidence. Yeah, the confidence you have in that. Yeah, but it's a good point. You can make some decisions before calving, and there's others that sleep better than when they have phenotypic data to back up the genetic predictions. So you can do some of both. You don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. But if you have the capacity to bring animals in and milk them for a couple of weeks and then sell, I actually presented this in California just a few weeks ago, is actually intentionally, to your point, Cheryl, breeding extra cows, heifers, well, breeding to produce extra heifers with the idea that you calve them and then you can market them at 90, 100 days to someone that needs heifers as a fresh lactating animal. It's a winning proposition.
Good job, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.